In another module, we mentioned the role of technology in the accelerating pace of change. I'd like to look now at other ways that technology is shaping the characteristics of the millennial generation. Older generations experienced the introduction of one technology after another during their lives. Not just computers, the internet, and cell phones, but automatic teller machines, surgical lasers, and other high-tech medical devices, the decoding of the human genome, space flight, and so on. They experienced a variety of reactions with each technological introduction, from excitement and wonder to confusion or dismay. But the millennial generation has never known a world without these technologies. Unlike older generations who've had to adapt to these developments, millennials have a matter-of-fact approach to these technologies. Growing up in the era of modern technologies has given the millennials a high degree of familiarity and adeptness with them. The incorporation of these technologies into their lives is also changing the way they relate to each other and the environment around them. Perhaps the most noticeable manifestation of this is the way that many teens and young adults seem to be in near constant communication with each other. They send emails to each other, engage in online chats, and seem to be constantly talking on their cell phones or sending a steady stream of text messages back and forth through them. In areas of the world where bank ATM and credit cards are ubiquitous, this is likely to be the first generation to make more purchases with electronic currency than with the old-fashioned paper kind. It has been noted by more than one middle-aged parent that their child is more adept with new technologies than they are. As one of those parents, I know the experience of asking my son to show me how to use some feature of my cell phone or to assist with a computer problem. This reverses the traditional roles in which the parent is the teacher and the child is the student. This role reversal can subvert to some degree the relationship between millennials and authority figures, not just parents, but also teachers or workplace supervisors. I want to stress, though, that this is not to say that it leads to a total lack of respect for their elders. There are other trends that work in combination with this role reversal, however, that make it more likely that millennials will not automatically defer to authority. As I noted earlier, younger generations generally have more formal education than their elders, which has a tendency to make them less likely to simply be passive recipients of the wisdom of the experts in all sorts of arenas, such as medicine or financial matters. These are also the children of the baby boom generation, a generation that often came into conflict with authority figures, such as those in government, during their teenaged and young adult years in the 1960s. All of these trends come together to create a tendency among millennials to want to think for themselves, to be given enough information to make their own decisions. One arena in which this is likely to manifest itself is the workplace. Many millennials will, like Generation X before them, want to have a degree of autonomy and authority in their jobs at a relatively early age. This can create conflicts with older managers who feel that these young workers have not yet proven themselves. Getting older and younger workers to see the value that each brings to the job can be necessary to prevent intergenerational disputes from erupting. Another influence on the characteristics of generations, particularly the millennials, is the ability of companies to deliver goods and services that are increasingly tailored to individuals' desires and needs. This trend is particularly interesting in that it illustrates the way that commerce and culture can interact in a sort of feedback loop. It begins for businesses in the need to develop a competitive edge, to create a product or service that is differentiated from the competition in a way that will draw the attention of consumers. At the same time, consumers are seeking products and services that better fulfill their specific needs. I'll give you a very simple example. Single-person households, a group that is growing rapidly in the U.S. and many other countries, often do not want products packaged in large quantities. They may not have a place to store it, or they may not be able to consume it before it spoils. Many companies responded by offering the same product in a range of package sizes, so that rather than selling only one size shampoo bottle, for example, consumers can now choose between 3 or 4 different sizes. Success in this first endeavor encourages the company to seek other small changes in the product, developing, for example, shampoos with different scents or with added ingredients. Now, rather than having 3 or 4 choices of size, consumers can choose between 8 or 10 or 12 different combinations of shampoo types and package sizes. With each new iteration of this process, not only does consumer choice grow, consumers' expectations about the degree of choice they can expect increases. For the oldest adults, this can be a burden. Having grown up with limited choices, they've had to learn to find the right product amidst this dizzying array of offerings. But the millennials are children of the era of choice. They quickly learn how to navigate through the choices, zeroing in on the one they want. Or they may switch between products or buy multiple variations of a product. Similarly, if you're as old as I am, you remember a world where television was very limited or even non-existent in many households. You watched whatever happened to be offered by the few stations broadcasting. Today's teens and young adults have an extraordinary range of entertainment choices, from those on radio or television to computers and video games, as well as recreational offerings outside the home that cater to them. In the end, the impact of having so much choice is to validate and encourage increased individualism. As manifested in the aisles of a grocery store, this individualism is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be more complicated when it is manifested in society or the workplace. For example, young adults may be reluctant to marry because they are seeking their perfect match. Similarly, they may want to sample a variety of different jobs, seeking one that provides the best fit. Neither of these is an inherently bad thing, but can become a problem if taken to extremes. In the U.S., individualism is one reason for the decline in membership in traditional civic groups. People are instead forming affinity groups centered on personal interests, such as particular hobbies, or professional groups that offer the potential for enhancement of the members' careers. While this has its negative side, such as a lack of engagement in the civic life of a nation, it also has positive aspects. Individualistic millennials are likely to have an entrepreneurial streak, seeking to make their own career path if they cannot find one that suits their individual interests. One of the more profound influences on the character of the millennial generation is globalization. Modern technologies have shrunk the world, giving people in even somewhat remote areas unprecedented access to other cultures. Television and the internet bring other cultures to us, while modern jet travel brings us to other cultures. Transnational businesses bring people from different countries into contact with each other, both in the workplace and through the export and import of international brands. Large corporations are increasingly transcending national boundaries. While they have exported their products for some time, the trend in recent years has been to export operations as well. Here in the U.S., one example of this can be found in the telephone helplines of major companies. Frequently, when Americans phone a company to make an inquiry or to resolve a problem, they are speaking to someone halfway across the globe. While the American caller may not even be aware of this fact, the workers on the other end of the line clearly are. Companies also increasingly locate offices or manufacturing facilities in other nations in which they do business. This means that the workers in those countries often have contact with managers from other countries or may even travel to the company's home office for training or other reasons. For millennials, this means that they often have contact with people from other nations and cultures during an early and formative period of their life. It also means that learning how to bridge cultural differences will be an important element of this generation's success in the global economy. One advantage millennials have in this arena is the fact that they frequently have common cultural reference points with millennials in other nations due to their consumption of international popular culture and their mutual affinities for modern technologies. It's important to note, however, that the globalization of business increases competition. If people in one country are not equipped to meet a company's workforce needs, they can locate their facilities elsewhere. For the millennial generation, this means that it is not enough to outperform your fellow citizens. They must be prepared to compete on the global stage. They need to learn more than ever before and to become lifelong learners, ready to adapt to the changing needs of modern businesses. It also means that millennials who speak more than one language will have a distinct advantage. In the U.S., this primarily means speaking Spanish in addition to English, although unfortunately, too few millennials are learning Spanish. In other countries, it means speaking English in addition to their native language, since, for better or worse, English has become the language of international business. In this context, however, I would like to point out that globalization does not just mean the spread of the U.S. culture to other parts of the world. While U.S. culture does tend to dominate, increasingly businesses in other cultures are becoming multinational. In the U.S., for example, the growing Hispanic population has meant that many elements of Latin American culture are being introduced into the U.S. This means that millennials here often have a significant degree of familiarity with the music, traditional holidays, and foods of Latin America. Millennials in the U.S. and elsewhere also have access to considerable information about other cultures through computers and the Internet. International commerce and global media and advertising often disrupt cultural norms, particularly among younger generations, such as the millennials. As international companies market their wares to teens and young adults around the world, they are pushing more than a product. In order to create demand for that product, they are also directly or indirectly marketing the set of values and aspirations that will spur millennials to consume these products. Older generations might once have been relatively content that they had their basic needs met and focus more on intangibles, such as spending time with the family or enjoying nature or playing sports. But the global promotion of a consumption lifestyle can undermine traditional culture. Researchers at the Harvard Medical School found one particularly unfortunate example of this. Studying the culture of the island nation of Fiji, they found that the exportation of global media into the local culture seemed to have an immediate and striking effect. The researchers found that about 3 years after television arrived, the incidence of eating disorders among young girls in Fiji increased sharply. What had happened was that these teenage girls had altered their self-perception based on the images they saw on television. According to the researchers, in traditional Fijian culture, social standing is dependent on how well you feed others. Not eating or striving to lose weight is considered a social disorder. And yet, in just a short period of time, television images were able to supplant these traditional mores. Quoting Ann Becker, the lead researcher in the Harvard study, cultures such as that in Fiji are essentially going from a subsistence agricultural society straight into the information age. Not only did the teenage girls Becker studied suddenly begin to emulate the physical attributes of the women they saw on television, they also began to take on the career aspirations of those television characters. One of the Fijian teenage girls in this study told the researchers that her friends, quote, changed their mood and their hairstyles so that they can be like those characters. While the sudden desire to adopt the appearance of these television characters is striking enough, it is particularly telling that this Fijian member of the millennial generation noted that her peers changed their mood. In other words, they were striving to adopt not simply a specific outward physical appearance. They were attempting to emulate what they perceived as the overall persona with the same attitudes and aspirations. Consumer culture redefines the markers of success from personal satisfaction and earning the respect of others to gaining material wealth and the ownership of certain identifiable markers, such as the right brand of clothing or automobiles or high-end technologies, such as flat-screen television sets. Ironically, even as the young girls of Fiji were redefining their self-image and placing a new value on being thin, the international culture's promotion of a lifestyle that encourages sedentary activities and the high consumption of high-fat, high-sugar, and high-calorie foods has led to an increase in the number of teens and young adults who are overweight or obese, and a concurrent rise in the prevalence of diabetes and other weight-related health problems. In the U.S., the increasing incidence of obesity among millennials, as well as older generations, has been called a national health crisis. Our eating habits and sedentary lifestyle are creating a situation in which becoming overweight is almost inevitable. While this process has been underway in the U.S. for some time, it is also seen in other countries. Health officials in Great Britain are concerned that rising obesity rates among millennials in that country will lead to an epidemic of diabetes. According to the Mexican Diabetes Federation, in 1968, diabetes was 35th on the list of causes of death, but today it is the leading cause of death. Other health issues may also leave their mark on the millennial generation. Beginning with the post-World War II baby boom, there's been a general improvement in health throughout much of the world, although the degree of improvement has varied from region to region. But in recent years, there has been a reemergence of old diseases, primarily due to resistance to commonly used antibiotics. And there is also the risk of the emergence of new diseases that will follow a course similar to that of HIV, creating health problems that are not easily solved and reducing life expectancy. This creates a particular urgency for healthcare professionals and others to prevent the deterioration of health among millennials from lifestyle-related causes, such as obesity. If the health of the millennial generation is already compromised due to lifestyle-related conditions, it will be that much more difficult to prevent other illnesses from taking a huge toll among them. Another problem facing the millennial generation is the uneven distribution of technology, which will likely further the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Millennials who are familiar with technologies from an early age will be well prepared to succeed in the globalized and high-tech world economy, while those with little or no access to technology will have considerable difficulty moving out of lower-paying, labor-intensive, and service jobs. It will be necessary to take an active approach to reduce the likelihood of having a wide gap between millennials who have had the opportunity to become adept with new technologies and those who have little or no familiarity with them. In many poor areas, the pooled resources of individuals or government and business financing can be used to create community centers that are equipped with computers and internet access, for example. This would enable more millennials and younger children to develop at least a basic level of familiarity with these technologies, and would give them the opportunity to access information and resources beyond what is available in their local community. The inequitable distribution of resources such as technology highlights the fact that while there are many commonalities among millennials, there are also many differences. The cultures around us are both global and local. Millennials in areas that are experiencing armed conflicts or serious economic problems obviously will have a very different set of challenges and concerns, and will likely form a somewhat different outlook on the world than their peers in other areas. It is therefore impossible to make specific observations or predictions about teens and young adults that will apply everywhere. International businesses seeking to reach the millennial generation can rely on some of the common cultural reference points of the generation. But it is critical to remember that how these commonalities are expressed by individual members of the millennial generation will vary widely depending on their local culture. For example, pop music has strong similarities among youth culture in different parts of the world. For most millennials, a particular rhythm or the use of certain instruments, for example, creates a sound that is recognizable to them as their music. But the specifics of the song, such as whether it's sung in Spanish or English or its use of cultural references, vary from place to place. In the same way, the broad themes of advertising and marketing and the major elements that are factored into the creation of goods and services for millennials can be much the same around the globe. But to be truly effective, these should be considered simply the framework on which one builds specific efforts tailored to millennials in different regions, nations, or even localities. This reflects the duality of today's teens and young adults. They're both a global generation, connecting across political, language, and other boundaries, and highly varied individualists who want to tailor their environment to fit their particular needs.